as you said. That
Like a joke. Now, outside.
The Alternative Dig Talk. Real issues, real talk.
I want to welcome you back, our colleagues and our viewers. And of course, on behalf of Digitalk TV, we wish to register our apologies for the technical breach. Sometimes there are things that we do not have control over. Gladly, we are back, and before we went into a forced leave, or rather a break, Professor Rogers Barigayomwe was trying to make his submissions, but because we lost all those means, and we'll ask him to summarize for us what his comparison of, between Uganda and, of course, TZ, the recently concluded elections and subsequent swearing in of the president of TZ. And then from there, we shall straight away run onto the United Nations, 8 years of its operation. Professor, sorry for let's call them unforeseen. Yeah, we aren't told enough to see what would happen, but now...
Thank you, Norman. I was actually trying to discuss that in comparison with the UN, that even the holy books tell us that in the last days, there will be sort of organized crimes. But the people who will be coordinating them will be world leaders, religious leaders, and these mafia rich people. It is in Revelations from 18 onwards, you can read it. In the context of the UN, look at East Africa. What is happening in East Africa is what would call organized crime, but by the leaders. And it is unfortunate, because how can a vice cross from Kenya into Uganda, into Tanzania? And it is all coordinated by its leadership. Up to now, evidence hasn't come out about Kizza Besigye, but it was organized between Uganda leadership and the Kenya leadership. And this crisis, which is reflected in Kenya, of awarding, the president awarding herself 95%, and even beating the record of my senior Obi Kagame, is a vice within the leadership of the East Africa. And in that context, I want to tell you, like what I've called organized crime, is that in East Africa, we've never had election, and it has never happened as such. But we always, in East Africa, we always have what we say kingmakers. To the benefit of my brother, Ochieno, it is alleged and a bit true that in 1981, the Muanga, the chairman of Electoral Commission, called Nyerere, who was a senior at that time, kingmaker, and said, no, these are the results we have.
What do we do?
But well, what do we do? And Muanga then said, but if you give Semoge, does he have an army? Give it to Obote. I'll just bring out some issues which came. The other thing, we had the one of Kibaki and Odinga. That time the senior man was the one of Uganda. And we are told the decision was made here in Uganda. About the election is made in, imagine it was in Uganda at first, the decision was made in Tanzania. The other one was made, the election was in Kenya, the decision was being made in Uganda. Then even recently, if you saw between election, even Odinga, rest in peace, himself, he had learnt it. After the other time he had been a victim, just before his election, you saw him how many times he came to Uganda, because he realized that an election in Uganda, in any country, is not just voting, it is seeing the kingmaker. And so, right now it is known who is the kingmaker. And that's why they were either fictitious or jokes that Sururu was in Uganda. Because they know, even the Tanzanians are convinced at that time, the senior man, the kingmaker, the one who decides who is to be, is seated right now in Kampala. So, as East Africa, let's just know, we go into these gimmick, cosmetic things, but the people who decide. Because, look at the vice. He rightly said, people knew Tanzania to be very democratic. Even Nyerere could not have got 95%. But because of these vices, Sururu, she copied from the bad manners of Kenya, Ruto and Museveni. Those two presidents, their bad manners have now crossed to Tanzania. Because, and the good enough, these ones, because I'm telling you, even in exam, we used to say that the people who cheat, you have to have some wisdom. Basics. You couldn't copy the name. But it seems in Tanzania, they've even copied the name. Because these ones of ours are experienced that they will even award themselves maybe 60 or 70.
You don't leave
exactly.
chances.
They don't leave chances. Oh, even because this time, Kizza Besigye was a victim, but not even now, Bobby Wine. You cannot take the two. You don't have an election. But these people who are copying their comrades,
And the name.
and they've overdone it. How can you have your two opponents and even call it an election? These bad vices they are copying are being spread across East Africa. And it is time that us East Africans, because how successful was the NRM revolution? And I will tell you, it's a revolution of...
Was it a revolution?
Oh, whatever it is, the resistance.
Okay.
Is because these fathers of ours, and I will tell you my father, they used to crisscross from Tanzania to Kenya. That's how they would survive. There is no way you can survive in only Uganda when you have to cause a revolution. But if now the leadership of these countries are now what I would call the organized crime or criminals, then the citizens, and that's why you see Gen Zs have started crisscrossing. By the way, I tell people what Besigye was looking for, and I want anyone to prove me the intelligence reports and everything, what Besigye had made, because after Besigye had clearly known that there is no chance of winning an election here, he took his FDC, those cadres to Kenya. What he wanted to learn was how to resist. He wanted to borrow the skills of the Gen Zs in Kenya. So right now, Besigye would, like if Besigye had been given a rally where he has 20,000 people, he was just going to run into State House. He was not going to wait for this January 15 like Chagulani is waiting. These guys knew.
This is breaking news.
No, that's what they knew. That's his only crime, because he's one of them. Like I've told you, they know they are bad manners. Besigye was one of them. He knew them. Yeah? Besigye. And that's why it's good for me when President Museveni talked of repenting, we should have all started repenting. Besigye himself, he had been a problem to Samuel Kennedy. Those are the blue-eyed, they are witches, they are that time of Museveni. Not knowing that this thing will turn against him. So he knows. These are his colleagues. You get it? Because basically to declare one evening, he was my own father. They knew that the next day they were going to be jailed. So they made Besigye declare presidency. It is out of, and who gives them the intelligence? Their own people. So what I'm showing you is until we reconcile in the whole region of East Africa, we need not any person in, for example, you cannot cause a revolution of Uganda in Uganda. No. We need each other in East Africa. But what is happening to Tanzania, which we thought was a peaceful part of East Africa, is because once we leave the bad vices in any of our region, it is going to spread. And now we are not going to have any good example, because the only example we are holding on was Tanzania.
Now that is gone.
Now Tanzania is gone. Our children.
Maybe you cross to Rwanda and now borrow from Rwanda.
Now, they've copied, Tanzania copied the Badma, and I even copied the name. And now they have, what did she get? 90?
Around 90.
The win in Rwanda is higher than our win.
And you hear what?
Norman is inviting you to go to your
Maybe
orbit in Kigali.
You better learn from your orbit.
Yeah, go to your orbit in Kigali.
Definitely he had been also mentored here. And
then where do we cross to? Do we cross to South Sudan? Awich?
No, Ugandans, you're on your own.
Anyhow, you have a few seconds, and then we should be crossing to the...
Yeah, so what the learning point then is, like, definitely it is stage managed, and Honorable Awich saying that so everything is peaceful. Like for them, Honorable, like they will tell you, for me I even didn't know that people even queue for fuel. These people are so cushioned from reality. Yeah? That the man moves in a convoy and the convoy takes 20 minutes, they will never notice. There is traffic jam, or there was chaos. Because when they hit the tear gas, that's when because for him he was at the status of representing the president. So now how could he have known? Definitely they are so cushioned that they themselves have failed to know. But yet they were victims. Remember, President Museveni and his group were like, this man of Obote. Now, when Nyerere was favoring Obote, that time Nyerere was a problem. But somehow when they come to the privileged class, now they cease to, now their interests start playing. And it is high time the whole of East Africa comes gangs against its leadership, because we've failed to get the best practice. Where can we, who do we copy from now? Maybe, is it Burundi now has, imagine now Burundi has a flag of East Africa, because Kenya is no more, Southern Sudan is no more, Uganda no more, Rwanda is no more now.
But do you know the outcome of the elections in Burundi for parliament? I think the governing party won 100%.
So I think for me...
is it Congo? Congo could be the best.
What if people in those countries are too appreciative of their candidates, and they can even give them 110%? Who knows? Anyhow, let's... if you
very quickly.
Yeah, sure. Like 40 or so seconds.
My young brother here raised something about Mwanga and Nyeri and Obote, and I need to put a disclaimer, and I think I need to authoritatively push it off, because it's unfounded, I can tell you. And it's very important because we're discussing elections and discussing the regions. Remember, also talked about 1975, and it was very deliberate, because that is something which is out there. Part of the thing that the generation of my elders did not do as much, particularly in Uganda, is actually to document sufficiently. And I still face that challenge, and I hope many of the young people, particularly young UPC guys looking, we have a huge amount of work to do in order to correct these things. We allow these guys to do a lot of propaganda so much, and yet because we have a future that must be for you young people, we need to correct this. One, the Tanzania of the 60s, Nyerere got away with quite a lot. You know, the perception in East Africa is that Obote was the worst in the 60s compared to Kenya and Tanzania. When in Tanzania, actually, both Tanzania and Kenya, Nyerere and Kenyatta went really, really brutal on opposition. We did not, with the exception of the 1966, which was not brutal, but it was a provocation against central government. Number two, the 1980 general elections. It is actually not true that Mwanga called Nyeri with such kind of information. And you're a researcher trying to establish it, and Mrs. Nyeri is still there, a number of other people. Check even in Museveni. What happened was Mwanga, as the chairman of the military commission, partly because of organized DP and UPM provocation. You know, DP was issuing results that did not exist. UPM, NRA were threatening going to the bush. DP had predominantly won in Uganda, and they won convincingly, you know. And with the absence of social media today, you know, it's basically meant that the majority of the people in the critical parts of the country would actually believe that DP had won elections, which was not necessarily true. For example, DP declared, I think, Gulu, a parliamentary seat where UPC was nearly winning by 90%, that they had won it, and one or two other constituencies
also had 90%.
Where elections had not completed. But no, most of the northern Uganda think these guys basically didn't have a base. But we can discuss that later. More significant though, when Muwanga issued a statement to say that no announcements by political parties, by anybody else, without clearance from him, merely clearance, and that's authoritative official. And I checked that very recently because I want to try and reorganize history. And where I've gone wrong, particularly as UPC, I'm ready to put up my hands. Apparently, Obote called him and scolded him. Check that. Obote called him and scolded him. Obote, remember, Obote, the mastermind, the father of the nation, the guy who pushed for this progress thing with the Moshi conference and things like that. Muwanga issued another statement, and I was discussing this with Minister Ali Romara just last week. I just couldn't put it on the record because I was trying to establish, and by then the damage had already been done. So for the record, that's sort of really what happened. Okay. UPC had won these elections convincingly.
Let me challenge him.
Yeah.
Mr. Ochieno, at that time, it was the Tanzanian army in charge of Uganda. True or false?
Tanzanian army, joint Tanzanian army, and
no, but the strength of when Uganda was with the Tanzanian army. Was it possible for any person to declare elections without consulting Nyerere?
Okay, let's.
Oh, is it the other debate goes on? Is it possible? Is it possible for Byabakama? Is it Byabakama?
This is Byabakama.
Is it possible? That is a debate we have as a citizen. Is it possible for Byabakama to declare an election which is against President Museveni without consulting the military? Those are issues which for us academicians
I will ask both of you to.
No, the contemporary academicians want to compare Uganda of NRA today with Uganda at the time. I'm trying to tell young Ugandans that there was ever better in this country.
Okay,
the 1980 election circumstance and the Electoral Commission of 1980, you cannot compare it with the NRA Electoral Commission today.
There,
but we can discuss that. And by the way, if you don't mind, I invite you
we'll have some other time
to have a topic of discussion
on
this very particular issue, because it's very important, yes.
Okay. Honorable Awich, you have had, you see, these two gentlemen don't recognize that you have the gains to protect you. That's why you left them to think through.
He was enjoying.
I don't know whether you would want, I could give you a minute to summarize his submission, your OB, and then we go into the UN. You mind?
Yes.
You have nothing useful to add, like lawyers say.
I have, especially with what my OB Rogers is saying. It makes me wonder whether I saw him in Intare. It was actually...
No, he was in Barara.
No, there could be twins.
And Intare was within Barara.
He was my mentor. He is my mentor.
He's now denying you.
He was in Umbara High School. I think this guy used to visit us in Intare. If only it wasn't for the fact that I was the chairman debate and I deliberately made them, the young stars, S1, S2, be the key debaters. Him, Simon Kasiate, who was in NBS and now with KCA, Dawoodi, and a few others. I would, because I was so keen, Talema, who became spokesperson, Electoral Commission, I was so keen on picking the young stars vis-a-vis the senior fives. Otherwise, recent Rogers submission would make me doubt if he was because he lacks objectivity deliberately. He's making assumptions, imagination, scenarios, guesswork, what you call, you know what they say in the Middle East, what is it? The,
conspiracy theory.
What?
The conspiracy theory.
Conspiracy theories. You know, it really lacks any depth of truth.
And gladly he's your mentee.
That's what I'm saying, what has happened along the way. So those assumptions and conspiracy theories and imaginations and drawing equations and thinking you'd solve them really distorts the thing. It is not true, for example, that things are set and done in Uganda. All these countries are countries of their sovereignty. In fact, they would take it as an insult to say that things are done for them in Uganda. And it is not done. Tanzania has a very strong state, very strong police, very strong intelligence. In fact, Tanzania wouldn't even tolerate any nonsense.
And by the way, if you don't mind, actually, that's very true. Of the 3 East African states, you can say anything about TZ, but TZ are very inward-looking, very independent, and very Tanzanian. Okay. But
very strong state, very strong, everything of their own. So, to the extent that even if you see the Al Jazeera or whatever burning that is being recycled, there's someone burning there. Okay. That fire that you are seeing is the one being recycled, shown and shown again. So it's not true. Or the Ugandan democratic process is genuine. I've said, and if we were this fraudulent, why would we want with 50-something%?
But he said, Honorable Awich,
and again,
he said that the other ones copied and also copied the name. So for you, leave some bit of.
I have said again and again that from West Nile to Karamoja, NUP don't have polling agents at polling stations. But you still find in Agago we declare Museveni has won 70%. In a district where we could literally say he has won 100. Okay. So this thing of fraud doesn't hold. Not at all. So theory. I can leave that with the conspiracy, assumptions, equations.
No, I wanted to qualify one thing because it is very unfortunate. How can you tell us that Tanzania never had influence in change of government in Uganda when it is clearly known? Okay. How can you say?
I don't think that is contested. That is context.
Yes, so what I'm showing you
is not contested.
Let's leave it at that. By God's grace, we shall have the 3 of you to discuss the authority.
I think we should at some stage.
Yes. In the East African politics, because what should be considered factual now, since Nyerere's departure, it's as if now the head boy of the region is known, to be honest, with what is on record.
And now President Ruto clearly said it.
Okay.
That Muzei here.
The beauty, the 2 of you, Honorable Awich and Professor Barigayomwe, are OBs closer to the power. Shall we cross to the UN? A precise brief about the UN, for purposes of our viewers, is that it came to replace the League of Nations, which they at a time had considered that it had lost its the purpose for which it was founded, and that was on 24th October 1945. As we speak, last month, 24th October, UN made 80 years. The reason for which we had to start with the local politics is to be sure and also shape the discussion on whether, because as you heard, we're talking about the East African community, like, of course, you cannot discuss Her Excellency Suruhu without talking about East African community. Now we want to use the remaining means to dissect and understand whether or not the United Nations still serves its purpose. We should also share precise concerns by people, which really hurts many, is the Israeli and Palestinian question, which is the unanswered question. We all know the conflicts in Israel and between Israel and Palestine. What hurts most also is that Israel got its independence in rather it was created, if I should use the word, in 1948. What is also factual is that there were citizens there where the Israelis, the Jews occupy. Sadly, if we could just run to 2012, September, President Obama said that they could not recognize Palestinian as an independent state because they did have formal leadership. It's on record, you can check. Now, with me here is Honorable Awich Pollah. Gladly, he sat in the UN as a judge. And we want to hear from him on whether or not the UN still serves the purpose for which it was founded. Honorable Awich, the time is spent there. Weren't you simply blind? Isn't the UN a blind dog trying to back around with specific powers vested into America as a country?
No, it is not. UN, the judgment that is passed on UN and says that is a backing door of not biting is passed by people who don't know UN holistically in what it does. Like any living organ, the UN is a living organ which should develop and should grow. And therefore, somebody should look at it in that way. And in that way, it would lead us to a scenario of a balanced seat. You have the negative side and the positive side. And for me, I would therefore want to weigh, is it the positive that is more, or is it the negative that is more? In my view, there's more positive in UN than the negative. UN has done so much and continues to do so much. I have said that even African countries which say UN doesn't favor it, we know for a fact that UN was born in 1945, and the only African country to talk about at that time was possibly Egypt and Liberia, or possibly Ethiopia, for the fact that Ethiopia was not conquered. But we have to ascertain when they joined UN. Liberia, as we all know,
it's an artificial country.
Was a country created for former slaves from Africa. I mean from America, who were brought back, and that is why they called themselves Freetown. Freetown because the slaves were brought back and freed. Amazingly, just a comment on that is that human nature is so funny. The very slaves who were brought back from Africa ended up enslaving the Liberians whom they found there. Said, but you guys, you have just been freed from America. Now you are enslaving your friends. That is another stage. No, they came and conflict came. Yeah. Therefore, for a start, I like to say that it is on record that UN is the one who led to the independence of African countries. Records are there to show very many resolutions of self-determination, decolonization. A lot of UN resolutions were passed to that effect. And amazingly, at a climax of East-West Cold War, it was one of the points of convergence by America and the Soviet Union, who were supporting decolonization. Soviet Union because the 1917 Bolshevik revolution, those are the workers' revolution in Soviet Union, in Russia, had brought in the workers on ground and led to a socialist kind of governance system, which was properly promoting rights. On the capitalist end, America also wanted to cut off the resources from Africa, the exploitation going to UK, to France, to Germany, to whatever. Therefore, the only forum that could advocate for self-determination was UN. How then does the very African, where UN promoted their liberation, promoted their independence, go ahead and again say it is not biting? How comes they were biting to the colonialists to the extent that they chased colonialism? The other aspect, the areas that is not seen, is that UN bodies, for example, the body that I served through a human rights system. There are 193 countries at that time for membership to United Nations. Now, all these states ratify conventions. And when they ratify conventions, Convention on Economic and Cultural, Civil and Political Covenant, discrimination against women, rights of the child, migrant, all these kind of conventions. Because international human rights system is governed by convention, that state committee ratification. Now the states ask themselves, colleagues, now that we have ratified, who is going to see that we are following? That Malawi is following, Uganda is following, Yugoslavia is following, Brazil, Canada. Therefore, they elect a panel of 9 human beings, and I'm happy to have been elected on those 9 human beings for 2 Kisanja, each Kisanja of 4 years. Now, how UN now comes in this forum alone is that, no man, most of the legislations that you see taking place, like passing a law on the rights of child, for example, Children Act or Children's Statute, many of the laws and provisions that are initiated in countries, including free education, UPE, they are mainly UN initiated programs and put to states as recommendations that you government legislate this kind of law. You government pass this law in your parliament. You government put these programs like UPE. So many of these programs are always taken by governments, and governments are not honest enough to say it came, for example, through a document called the Concluding Observations. Concluding observations to states are UN recommendations or UN judgment on governments to tell governments what they should do. But when government pick up this thing, including laws that they pass in parliament, they don't tell you it is UN, and yet it is UN. Of course, we have had many diaspora things. UN has insisted on the protection of rights of people who have run away from problems. And the records are clear. Uganda itself has been in the front of a refugee protection, to the extent that for a long time, Uganda has been country number 1 in a friendly, foreign-friendly countries, until recently Turkey overtook us. We have had refugees from Congo, from Somalia, from Sudan, from everywhere that we have had. Now, we have done it, and it is done all over the world. We have been number 1 in our best. And why? Because our Omuntu, our Omuntu, Bantu spirit that Ugandans have. The UN later on sent money under refugees. Turkey overtook us because Turkey has been used by Western world as a buffer zone to protect refugees coming from the east entering Western Europe. They don't want them. Now they give money to Turkey to act as a buffer zone. Now when money is given to Turkey, and big money, then Turkey now starts to be refugee friendly, passing legislations in parliament of Turkey, which is refugee friendly, putting institutions or protecting refugees in Turkey, which is friendly. And for now, Turkey has overtaken us in the friendliness, but we have remained number 2. So all these are UN, and UN has been firm on the principle of non-refoulement. Non-refoulement means if somebody has already run from Rwanda to Uganda, please, he has run for safety, don't take him back. And it is a serious international crime, and US has practiced this. So, for those who don't know UN, they look at it in the periphery because war has broken in Rwanda and it did not stop, or war was in Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia. Chechnya, they didn't do much, and they judge it from that parochial point of view. But looking at UN holistically, it has done so much, including education. How do you think that your medical degree in Uganda is honored in Brazil? Okay. Because UN has put through UNESCO a standardized kind of education system. So many people who blame UN, they have not seen the work of UN. Even for Africans, I repeat, they even forget that the self-determination, the decolonization was done by UN in Africa.
The gentlemen next to you have keenly listened to you as you defended your once appointing authority.
Once an employer, yes. No, Comrade has done very well.
Kindly, if you could use 5 or so minutes, and then you cross to about on whether UN really has served the purpose for which it was founded. 8 years, by the way. Because we also want to ask Honorable Awich, perhaps also remind him on whether one would jubilate their kids if they began limping or crawling at 80. Proceed from there and judge them using 80 years as a yardstick.
Yeah. Actually, Comrade Rich has done quite well on defending the UN and explaining the UN to the extent that some aspects of it, I agree with him, people tend to take very much for granted. Okay. But also that I think, Comrade Rich, if a job becomes available as part of the UN communications team, I think I would recommend you. And by the way, I nearly applied and I nearly worked in the UN's communications team at some stage, except that I was totally committed to the liberation of this country and this sub-region. And that's why I feel very sad, the nonsense mess that I see happening both in Uganda and within the environments, because I'm totally an African. And so that really substantially influenced me. And now that said, it's not surprising that while we recognize and acknowledge the broad framework around which the UN's foundations establishes, if you like, the thematic context within nation states set their laws and indeed big programs for the development of their people. I am extremely critical about the fact that the UN's big governing body, the Security Council, continues to be a body of imperial privilege with 5 permanent members, and all of us continue to be observers. And unless and until that changes, all the other things to me are basically patronizing to us as Africans. And for that reason, I reject giving them, on balance, the credit. But critically, in a balanced way, generally by and large, yes, they've made contributions, but I don't think that I would give them 51%. That said, also, I agree with Comrade Awich that thanks actually to the UN's Geneva Convention of 1951 on the Refugee Convention, on the question of the protection of refugees, I am possibly alive. On the basis of that, I escaped from NRM in Kampala, from Makerere University indeed as a student, found myself in the UK. The British government were terrible because at the time they were playing their politics, and because we're a Commonwealth country, talk about organization, UN, Commonwealth has gone on its ways. They had opened up this thing, the Commonwealth countries you don't have to get visas. And so we didn't require visas to enter there. So in a way it saved me, in another way also, a crash from this bunch here at Kampala. But then once I entered there and declared myself a refugee, the British were beginning to do numbers. So these people coming from Uganda, and Museveni is our stooge, you know, the more refugees we accept and give them refugee status, the more our citizens and indeed our legislators begin to say, there's so many Ugandans who are coming in and qualifying as refugees. So they give 10 refugees, then they created this thing of what they call exceptional leave to remain. And exceptional a few other people, of course, then they refuse. Completely contrary to the Geneva Convention. And one time I was in a conference in London with Peter Otai, the late, and I said that my status was exceptional, because I'm one of those people who got exceptional leave rather than direct refugee status. And I strongly objected to it. I still do today. And I taunted the British government officials. And lucky enough, after a few years, the Labour Party became my very good friends, and I got to know some of these leaders and have conversations with them on the questions of migration. UN, the earliest thing as a chalk obstacle beyond the contradictions of power of the Security Council, which must be broken, was the Arab-Israeli conflict. That the UN has failed to play a genuine, neutral, balanced, and effective arbitrator leads the question to me of what really is the use of the agency. as well as my primary school, and unlike some of your students today, which we used to sing in primary school before we went to meet. Of course, you guys went to school where maybe you didn't know about resolution 242, is it 232 of the UN, the earliest resolution at the time, which was passed unanimously on the Arab-Israeli question, on determining the Palestinians must have a right to self-determination and return to the pre-1966 67 borders. Now, that has never been realized. And for me, that has always been a yardstick, and I've discussed this, including with some few presidents and prime ministers I've had the few privileges to have conversations with, that unless and until these are translated into reality, I can understand the deep politics about it, then we are hypocritically talking. Okay. That, fast forward, UN comes and into Congo, you know, and we have, in the name of peacekeepers, largest peacekeeping operations. But if you go into the details of what these guys are doing, in the name of the agency, it's neither here nor there. I have had my own experiences of diplomatic conversations with people where people operate in the name of UN, including the Sudan and South Sudan, prior to the breakup of the countries. You find that these agencies sometimes they do more bad than good. But I agree that in the standard agencies, in this case recently much more environmental position, environmental issues, education, health, things like that, they come with the benchmarks and nation states speak. But I keep on asking that, do I need to wait for a UN agency to have a determination somewhere in New York before we take it? Which for information, Uganda People's Congress that you guys fought, Uganda People's Congress that you guys fought, in 1962, young man, at independence, we committed ourselves to universal education by 1972, 10 years, you know, and from 1964, with the Education Reform Bill, we opened up free education post-senior 4, and we provided with the intention of doing that. Now, this is then in the 70s. Those are nation-state governments. We're putting this in the context of the UN. I'm saying that while we critique UN, we should not forget our responsibilities, and African governments particularly should not forget their burden of responsibilities. Granted, in 1985, as part of the UN thing in the Nairobi summit, that is the first one where Uganda was represented by Mama Mira, the beginning of the big talk of the emancipation of women thing. And from Nairobi then went to Beijing. And from Beijing today, we are seeing this. So from that context, you can actually see that, yes,
as we close,
as part of these things, the global agency does some work. I am just concerned that that crooked talking shop every year in New York is hugely expensive, hugely time-wasting, hugely resource-wasting, and the future UPC government would cut the delegation by absolutely 90%.
Your closing remarks, because I will not come back to you, but with a leading question on whether or not UN is still relevant. A yes or no?
As a global body, within the context of what Comrade Rich says, but it needs urgent reform.
Out of 10?
It is, sorry?
Yeah.
Out of 10?
Out of 10, how many marks?
No, they get 4. But urgent reform is needed. No, it's a concrete remark. Urgent reform is needed. In this, after 80 years, it is wrong that 5 countries control, you know, the direction of UN, and they have the right to vote, and Africa does not have a single seat in that. I would suggest that Africa gets 2 voting positions. They must reform that. If they don't reform that, I think Africa should seek to taunt them like you, trying to taunt them, the Commonwealth over South Africa and Zimbabwe.
Professor Rogers, I'll give you 5 minutes. I'll come back close with Honorable Awich with the minute. And of course, with the highlights of the massacres and genocides that have happened. We have the Janjaweed in Sudan, we have the war in Chechnya, we have as many as possible. But also
the war in northern Uganda,
the war in northern
for which
Uganda
they were very partisan, criminally.
We have Somalia,
the UN criminally
what's happening. But most importantly is about the selective trials. We mentioned, I think there is Pinochet, General Pinochet, and but when it comes to the big wings, they are never tried anywhere. And to some people, they also continue to believe that it is simply giving Americans, you know, to look like they are the head boys of the world. What is your comment in around 45 minutes?
Because of the few minutes, I'll just build on what my colleagues have discussed. And starting my senior mentor, I talked about the UN, these people of Liberia, free state,
Yeah.
guys who came from
Slavery.
slavery,
states, yeah.
and now they were
Enslaved, they are
haunting
indigenous.
theirs.
Mm.
That's achievement is right. UN delivered that from colonialists, and then created the colonialists, the NRM colonialists, who have been worse even than the other colonialists at some extent. Yeah, so, and you see the UN has worked on enforcing these colonialists on us. And his second point was, yes, the way he's saying Turkey plays games with the UN. That's how some of these dictatorships play games with the UN. Uganda, he gave a very good example. They say, and I'm a professor of human rights, they say Uganda has one of the best policies. Which best policies?
Refugees?
We have refugees, the most refugees in this area. These are Eritreans. The Eritreans are not going to school. I'm a university professor at a university where the Eritreans are all neighbors. I haven't lectured even one Eritrean. Which policy do you have of education?
Maybe they come with their
So
qualifications. They don't come
now,
to come
what this government and other governments do is that to just siphon money out of the UN, they show that they have refugees and use it as a game, because these whites have their game, and that's where I say for some, but I condemn them because they don't want, they know it is a natural right given by God that someone can come from Uganda to North America. There is no boundary between Uganda and Kenya, between Uganda and, it's just natural boundaries. So it's a right. So because they don't want these refugees to end up in US, in Canada, where they would spend about $100 on a day on a refugee, they would give the pocket to people like the leaders in Africa who have bank deals with them to carry as many refugees here. And by the way, it gives them bargaining power to stay as dictators.
Always, yes.
And because these guys are doing their dirty work. These guys, these African leaders, our leaders, are doing dirty work for the UN. They are like organized, what I call organized criminals. And so they keep them in power. Because right now I would say, let's say our governments here in Africa, most of them, the dictators, are in power because of the power of the UN. Because, for example, how the NRM came into power, it was popular resistance of people. And when it came, it changed. Metamorphosed, and you say they became Amoyibas. And right now, they are the same people by going to Somalia, going here and there, they do the dirty work, and then the UN sees they are doing, they support them. Actually, right now, let's talk about the veto powers. Practically, most of the members by the UN voted that Palestine be recognized. But some people who hold veto powers, and this veto power, by the way, at international global level, is how you see it in the movement. There are people who hold, it is not the majority, because the majority decided what to do. The majority of Ugandans know what should be, but there are people who hold veto powers, both in the UN and how you see it here. So that veto power is our biggest concern as citizens, global citizens and citizens of Uganda, that people hold veto power and they are minority, but that veto power means a lot.
Thank you, Professor Rogers. Honorable Awich, you have heard, who holds the veto power in NRM? Because your OB said when it comes to NRM, because it's a brief comparison now between the veto powers in the UN and what is happening here. But do you agree or otherwise with them, with due honesty, not because you served there as a judge? Do you still need UN as is?
I said earlier that UN being an organ a living organ should grow. I think maybe I was too general in that, and my colleague of the Congress went into detail. What I meant by growing is that you can't remain static without any change. I already said that by the time UN was formed, there were nearly 2 countries in Africa, and therefore they couldn't have envisaged Africans' role in the highest decision making. So it is long past time that Africa should have been brought on board. But about veto power in NRM, there's no such a thing. I already said my hobby is full of imaginations and conspiracy theories and assumptions.
I will
we
ask
don't
my
have
producer
that.
to borrow me 40 seconds. I'll give 20 to Professor Rogers out of 10 because Mr. Ochieno gave them the UN 4 out of 10. How many do you give them?
Yeah, I would also give them 4 out of 10 and tell them to wake up, because they removed the colonialists and created more colonialists to us in Uganda. And indeed, through their UN policy, that diplomacy, which Honorable Awich talks about, after even oppression of citizens, which is known, you see some of those UN countries who say they have a culture of human rights, parading themselves on photo opportunities with the people terrorizing the citizens, well-known generals, and the UN is parading with these criminals. And now you say we should clap for the UN when they are oppressing us indirectly. So I would give them, I give them 2 out of 10.
Again. Ridiculous. Honorable Awich, finally, how many do you give yourselves?
As all the attempts made, 7 out of 10 is fair for you.
As we speak, we have a 7 out of 10, we have a 4 out of 10, and we also have now, at some point it was a 4, now
I've
2.
reduced.
Now reduced to 1, or to 2.
To
2. Okay. Gentlemen and ladies out there watching us, may you be blessed. Catch you some other time. No one.
The Alternative Dig Talk. Real issues, real talk.